6 p.m. on Wednesday, December the 4th. We'll call to order the Forest Lake Airport Commission. Mr. Schmidt, would you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Dahlbeck.
Present.
Mr. Husnick.
Here.
Mr. Munson is absent. Mr. Schmidt is here. Mr. Steeler.
Present.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Right. Do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes? Or are there any additions or changes to the minutes before I ask for a motion to approve?
I didn't notice any, so
I didn't notice any either.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
We have a motion from Mr. Husnick. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Schmidt.
Second from Schmidt. All in favor? Aye.
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 I wasn't present.
You
so-
weren't present, okay. We have a
We'll
quorum
abstain.
anyway, so it passes. Meeting minutes are approved from last week. We will jump to Bolton and Mink. Silas?
Well, thanks again for the time. And talking to Mr. Undum, the agenda here, we'll kind of jump around a little bit. I'll save the master plan and the ALP update presentation kind of for the end and kind of go through some of the other items on the list. So in regards to the runway, taxiway apron, and taxi lane pavement maintenance project, the city did receive the grant offer from MnDOT Aeronautics last week. I believe it is going to council next week. Is that correct?
It'll be on there Monday for city signatures.
So the total project for that one, inclusive of the master plan update and the construction, $303,654, of which the state share is 95%, the local share is 5%. So City of Forest Lake investment for that is $15,182. So good deal all around to kind of protect the investment that the city made in paving the runway. And like we discussed at previous commission meetings, the plan for construction for that will be sometime late spring, early summer of next year. We'll work with the contractor on figuring out their schedule and then make sure the commission's updated, because there are going to be periodic runway closures, just to make sure everyone's on board with that. I'll pause there if anyone's got questions. All right, we'll come back to number 2 on the update memo. The fuel system pump and card reader system, my understanding is Mr. Undum is still waiting on receiving the quote back. If you guys recall, it was a situation where QT Pro is discontinuing, is it the card reader and the pump?
Yeah, the current model that's out there is, they've end-of-lifed it, so they still are offering support, but they're no longer making new parts for it. So at some point in the near future, we will not be able to get parts for it. So that's why it got brought forward for consideration as a project, because we don't want to be in a situation we have a pump or a card reader out there we can't get parts for anymore. So it's time to look for getting that upgraded.
So as soon as the quote is received, I will update the airport. CIP, MnDOT is not going to be taking a snapshot of the Forest Lake CIP until February of next year. So we have a 2-month time period here to get it on there, and then from there, they'll do their analysis with all the airports across the state and let us know what their green list is for projects that have been allocated state funding for. I received a call last month, I can't remember the gentleman's name, asking about helicopter operations at the airport. He had stated that Lifelink and North Memorial fly in and out of the airport numerous occasions, and wondering if it makes sense to paint a helipad out there. So within your packet, MnDOT has kind of some standards for a hospital heliport surface. And the biggest thing to take of note on this is if the city of Forest Lake does decide to implement a heliport at the airport, you do have to have clear approaches. But helicopters are allowed to operate freely on your runway 1331 at any given time. They're no different than any other, fixed wing aircraft. So if there's really no need to have to designate a heliport, because they can operate, freely on the runway. But if you did want to implement one, just kind of keep in mind, it does come with constructing a hard surface and also having 8-to-1 approaches with 135-degree radius clear. So I'm not even sure if you would be able to get those approaches cleared, considering, the density of, housing and things like that around the airport.
I'd like to make a couple comments about that, if you don't mind, Silas.
Yes, sir.
Because my son is, he was a lead pilot for Lifelink for quite some time. Not Lifelink, North Memorial, excuse me. And in talking to him, he said there's never, ever been a situation where they've demanded to have a heliport anywhere. It's up to them, as a private company, to decide where they're going to land and teach people where they're going to meet. And so, as far as I'm concerned, the City of Forest Lake or any other airport's not obligated to make any kind of special accommodations for them. And because they're a private company, you know, we're public, and so we have no obligation to do anything on their behalf. It's up to them. Like you said, they can land on the runway, the taxiway, whatever. And nowadays they use air helicopters that don't have skids, or they can taxi around any place, you know, on wheels. And so I just want to put that to bed, that I don't think we should ever even consider doing that for helicopters. So.
Sure. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I know Mr. Undum has a comment about possibly adding some signage for, in the event an ambulance does come in Forest Boulevard there, instead of just going straight to the parking lot. They do kind of have some signs of they do need to navigate up a taxiway to get to the apron pavement.
That's true, but they should be teaching, they should be educating their people too, that that's the way it is, you know?
Correct.
So, I mean, the signage is okay, but I don't think we should go beyond that.
Yeah, and we kind of looked at that possibility of, instead of having, because I think the issue kind of was brought up that they're going towards the arrival departure building and not towards the taxiway, so we just assigned saying emergency vehicles. That way at least would prevent them from going down that one road thinking they're gonna hit the taxiway when they need to go straight there. So no sign has been placed to date, but we're looking into the possibility of a sign there, in addition to some, you know, reaching out for some training as well.
Any other questions on that? And then kind of the CIP, and I touched on it briefly with the QT Pro fuel system reader. So it's included in your packet here. What we're operating under right now is 2021. So that's when February of next year, MnDOT's going to take their snapshot. So you can see the projects identified there right now are apron expansion, infield drainage improvements, south building area fence. We also have the East Hangar taxi lane project that did not get green listed for 2020. We can move down and then also look at what the quote is received for the fuel system upgrades. But as part of the master plan, we'll be doing a more kind of thorough analysis of the CIP based on, you know, the results of that study to kind of help the commission and the city kind of determine, you know, what are the priorities and needs for the airport, and what you as a commission and the city, you know, makes sense for you guys to plan for moving forward. So I wouldn't put too much stake in, you know, the 20-year CIP, because it's just put on there realistically to appease MnDOT Aeronautics. But what it would be nice is if you guys take some time this month and next to really look at 2021, and is there anything that's of a more pressing nature that you guys would like to see put on there before you have the luxury of reviewing the master plan study and seeing kind of what projects there's more of a demand for.
I think obviously we want to move down that East Hangar area taxi lanes. I mean, I would think that would just automatically go down to the next year. Do we need a formal vote on that or something?
Nope, it just, since that didn't get awarded, I'll just bump it down to the
Yeah,
next
I mean,
year.
Absolutely, that would go down to there, but yeah, we can be contemplating other
Sure.
items from there.
All right, if there's nothing else, I can jump right into kind of the master plan update meeting to kind of give you guys an update of where things are at. I don't know, Mr. Undum, do we?
Yeah, right now.
Sure. And with that, I'll bring Chris Gardner up here with me as the aviation planner. He's kind of doing more of the technical work on this one, kind of reviewing the user surveys and doing the analysis and a lot of the fun stuff. So I brought him along to kind of go through that. Well, we'll try to end this before 9. No, just kidding. Joking, of course. Well, thanks for taking the time here. I know there's some members in the audience here as well. At any time, if you got questions about anything, either commission members, Mr. Undum, or from the audience there, just feel welcome to let us know. There's going to be a lot of information that's kind of presented to you here, and if you got a question at any time, feel welcome to stop and ask us what's going on. if I can find a way to switch slides. There we go.
Before we begin, just so everybody knows, this presentation's on the airport website right now, the city side, so it's been uploaded, so it is there in PDF form, so if people want to download it and take a look at it at their leisure, it's up there right now.
Thank you.
So this is kind of the process slide that we had showed you guys at the October kickoff meeting. So what's been done so far is we've collected all the inventory at the airport, so that primarily is identifying all the facilities that exist, taking photographs to document the existing conditions that are there, and to kind of take an aerial photography to kind of have an idea of, what type of conditions that we're dealing with there. Obviously, there's some wetlands in the area. There's farmland that the city farms out. That kind of goes a long way into kind of determining, where to propose, development for the airport, not put in an area that's going to be kind of restrictive in terms of what you can do. The second part of it is kind of the aviation demand forecast, and that is driven based off the user surveys that were submitted. Chris will get in a lot more detailed about those as we come up, but I will say we did get an exceptional response here for the Forest Lake Airport and the users. I mean, it was by far the most number of results that I have ever seen in completing one of these studies, so there's a lot of interest in the airport, and it's all good news to have that data from. Chris will get into the exact numbers. So then from here, kind of the 3 through 6 are kind of where the next steps are going. Facility requirements is next. So based upon, the data that was collected from the user surveys and some conversation that we have here is to really start the driving force for the master plan is determining what facilities the Forest Lake Airport should plan for, and then the alternatives part of that is where they should be located and how they should be orientated. And then, you implement the plan, and then the final part is the report and ALP for review. This is kind of the schedule of where we are with the project. Here in December, talk about the demand forecast and the user survey result. I understand there could be a potential for some schedule change for the airport commission meeting here. We'll adjust the schedule based on whatever the commission here decides, but that kind of gives you an idea of, beginning in March, we'll be kind of looking at, every couple months there to come back with another meeting to kind of show the commission and the members of the public kind of where the progress is being made on the master plan. So the agenda for today is to kind of provide a summary of the airport inventory that was completed, review the user survey results, which is kind of the meat of the presentation here, kind of talk about what the users of the airport or potential users have to say, take a look at the based aircraft forecast, which kind of forecast what the expected number of based aircraft could be at the Forest Lake Airport kind of moving forward. Similarly with based aircraft, we do an operation forecast to kind of help determine how many potential operations would be occurring here. Just so everyone's on the same page, an operation is either a landing or a takeoff. So if someone takes off or lands, that's considered 2 operations, just so everyone's on the same page there. Critical design aircraft, and then start beginning kind of discussion about facility requirements moving forward. The summary of the airport inventory is, pretty straightforward. What it is a snapshot in time of, it's 27 current hangars that are constructed at the airport. Based on the MnDOT registration list, there are 37 based aircraft. Chris is going to get a little more detail about that number. There's, avgas under low lead fuel available, 6 tie downs, and then, there are 4 hangar lots that are currently, not built out, but all 4 of them are leased out, and there's one that's currently under construction, kind of a large, commercial FBO hangar, kind of adjacent to the fuel and the apron, and then like I mentioned, the other 3 hangars the land is leased, so I'm not sure what the timeline for construction is on those. And then no approaches to runway 1331. It's visual only at 2,700 feet in length. Oh, and then all the photos and everything I have given to Mr. Undum. I believe they're all available online as well, along with the aerial photo, if each one of you kind of want to see of what type of inventory photos exist. I'll pause there if anyone's got questions about that. All right, seeing none, like I mentioned before, great response on the user survey 111 of those submitted over about a 6-week period. So thanks to all the commission members. I'm sure you guys spread word of mouth out there. Thanks to Mr. Undum for keeping the website active, and then just some literature at the airport. So that was great to see. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to kind of get into some more technical details about the update.
Thanks, House. Thanks for having me, guys. So we're going to talk a little bit about the user survey that we just, I hope everyone completed one in here. So we'll talk a little bit about the user survey, and then as Silas said, we'll get into some of the forecasting based off that user survey, and move into some facility requirements. So we did have a really great response rate. 111 users did submit a user survey. 28 of the 37 based aircraft indicated by MnDOT, 28 of the users did respond with a user survey indicating they had an aircraft based at 25D. 32 responded would base at 25D if adequate facilities existed. So this is a pretty large number of users that would like to base their aircraft at Forest Lake Airport here. 69 of the responses indicated that the runway length is adequate. However, there was 27 users that responded that the length is inadequate. So these are some things to think about as we move forward with some of the facility requirements, and moving forward to planning for the future of the airport here, is the large number of users that you guys have that would like to base at the airport, and some of the facilities that would be required to get some of the people to base there. So 14 people did respond that they do currently make load concessions to use the airport. And as far as approaches go, 30 of the 66 users that answered this question indicated that it would increase their ability to use the airport if they did have some sort of an instrument approach available to them. So based on the overall results of the user survey, not including the business users, we'll talk about that in a second, the main thing here was the need for additional hangar space. There was a large number of users that would need additional hangar space in order to base here, and this could be both, we had users indicating both public and private, such as lots, and or potential for T-hangar public rental space. Facilities are adequate for the public, such as like the fuel, the terminal, ground service was all indicated by most users as very adequate. And the runway length was adequate for the most part. However, a longer length, such as 3,000 or 3,200, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, would also help some of the users that indicated they would like to base here. So onto the business user survey. So this was geared towards more businesses in the area. We only got 5 responses on this, which actually isn't too bad. 2 out of the 5 responded that they currently use Forest Lake for business purposes. 3 responded that they don't use the airport currently due to inadequate runway length and no transient hangar facility available. 3 also responded that they would base their aircraft at Forest Lake if hangar facilities existed. So this is another large percentage. I mean, there's some businesses out there that would also like to base, aircraft for business purposes at the airport if there was adequate hangar space available. Some of the main takeaways off the business user surveys were the need for additional hangar space. Once again, the longer runway would allow more aircraft to base here, some larger aircraft. We'll get into that here in a little bit when we talk about the forecasting, as well as approaches would help during instrument conditions. So the based aircraft forecast, so this is where we actually get into some of the stuff that's going to drive the needs that we see at the airport here. So all of the data that we're showing right here for the based aircraft forecast comes from the State Aviation System Plan, which I'll probably refer to as the SASP quite a bit coming up here. So what the SASP is, for anybody that's not familiar, is MnDOT Aeronautics every 8 years roughly does kind of a snapshot and looks at the state of aviation as a whole across the whole state, as well as examines what individual airports are at, and they look at stuff like operations, based aircraft, if the airports have the facilities they need, where they're lacking, whether it's approaches, whether it's runway length, whether it's hangars, anything like that. So they kind of identify the strengths and weaknesses of airports throughout the state and just the state as a whole for the aviation community. So for us doing our based aircraft forecasts, what we essentially do here is, and one of the important things to note is the last time the SASP was updated by the state of Minnesota was in 2010. So the data being used for it was 2012. However, the baseline data being used for the 2012 SASP update was prior to the paving of the runway at Forest Lake here, which is important to note because I think that snapshot probably doesn't show some of the growth that's happened at the airport since the paving of the runway. So we'll talk about that a little bit here, but so what we essentially do is we look at other similar airports, and we look at both similar geographically as well as similar in size. So we like to get airports from the same region. It is tough because we can't really compare a Forest Lake size airport to a Anoka size airport that has 300 and some based aircraft. Their growth rates, their needs, stuff like that are going to be different. So we take airports, we try to keep them as close as we can, but we do take airports that are roughly similar in size and kind of look at the SASP data from them and compare that to what we have at Forest Lake. So if we look on the table up here, for based aircraft, this is what the SASP is listing. So we do this and we calculate out the annual growth rates. So if the airports we used for this example were Glencoe, Princeton, Buffalo, Cambridge, and Rush City Regional, as well as looking at Forest Lake. So if we take a look at the annual growth rates based off their based aircraft from the SASP and the SASP projections for the years 12 to 15, 16 to 20, 21 to 30, we can kind of calculate out their annual growth rates that the state of Minnesota is seeing at the time that the SASP was published. So we take their annual growth rates, looking at similar sized airports. We also look at the annual growth rate from Forest Lake, and we kind of compare the average of the surrounding airports with what we see at Forest Lake. So if you see on the bottom, Forest Lake's at a 1.63% annual growth rate. And keep in mind, this is the annual growth rate before you guys paved and really took off with hangars recently. The surrounding airport growth rate's about a 1.87% annual growth rate. If we look at the bottom, we did a real quick comparison just looking at the years 2013 to 2018. And we did this just based on, kind of the assumption of one aircraft per hangar. So this is actually just the hangar growth since paving. So if we look in 2013, you guys had 14 hangars. And in the 5 years up to 2018, that increased from 14 to 24. So over that 5 year period, you guys had an 11.3, essentially an 11.4% annual growth rate, which is that's an unheard of growth rate essentially. And we don't necessarily think that that's going to continue, obviously forever, but that's a really large growth rate to keep in mind for our forecasting purposes going forward here. So with Forest Lake, the current SASP data being at 1.63%, what we do next then is we kind of find a conservative average of what we think we can apply for a growth rate over the 20-year planning period. So just for this example, and what we're currently using, we'll see on the next slide here, is we are using a 1.75% average annual growth rate, which is right in between what Forest Lake had off of the SASP data and kind of the surrounding similar airports. So if we look at this graph, we can see that Based off the MnDOT, the current MnDOT registration list, MnDOT lists 37 based aircraft currently on the field. We would also like to verify with a local count. At some point, if we could get the local data just to verify, we think it would only help you guys. Generally, the local count will come in higher than the registered aircraft. You know, there is multiple situations where somebody might not have a currently registered aircraft in their hangar. That's more than fine. We can still count that as a based aircraft, even though it's not on MnDOT's current registration list. So, you know, there's examples, maybe like somebody has an old aircraft in their hangar that they're fixing on, they're working on. Maybe somebody's building a new airplane and doesn't have it currently registered. So those scenarios, we can still count that as based aircraft, and that's where a local count can really help us to get larger numbers on the based aircraft, which you'll see in a minute here, also leads into our operations. And this is what drives kind of the facility needs and the demand at the airport here. So based off the MnDOT list, you can see in 2019, we started at 37 based aircraft currently. We also, over the next couple of years, we've also manually, we've applied our 1.75% growth rate, but we've also added a couple aircraft in manually. Because as Silas mentioned previously, we know that we have a few hangar lots. We've got a hangar being built currently, and I think it's pretty likely that hangars are going to be built on the remaining lots that don't actively have hangars on them. So based on this, I believe for 2020 we added 2 more aircraft, and for 2021 we added 2 aircraft as well, assuming that these hangars get built and have some more aircraft come in that base here. So if you take a look at the graph here, by just adding in those couple manual numbers, going through the 20-year planning period out to 2039, we end up at 59 based aircraft. So this isn't including, we'll also adjust this forecast when we get into some of the facility requirements and determine when there is potential for you guys to expand. Right now, we know that there isn't any lots left available. With the demand that we've seen on the user surveys and the desire from people to base here, we feel that there would be people coming to base here if there were lots available. So if it ends up being, a few years out here that you guys have lots available again, we would kind of adjust this forecast off the based aircraft to include, some of the lots that we see that would be available for people to base additional aircraft here.
Do you make any adjustment in your forecasts for demand, whether there are lots available or whether there are T-hangars available?
We would, especially on the based aircraft. If this was something where, just hypothetically speaking, if you guys knew that, you're planning on that and, had it listed on your CIP and had the funding for it, if you knew that in, 2023, you planned on building a T-hangar, based on the demand, we would adjust our forecast to include, 8 additional based aircraft if it was an 8-unit T-hangar there. Does that answer your question?
It helps.
Okay.
I'm in favor of us getting T-hangars.
Okay.
The problem is the money tree is not blooming.
I well understand that. And there was actually definitely some users in favor of getting additional T-hangars out here. And I know it does come into the money side of things with that as well. So So this is kind of where we are. A real conservative baseline based aircraft forecast looking at the next 20 years here. I do anticipate that we will adjust this up slightly. One, based on the large growth that you guys have had in years recently. We also do need to keep in mind that there isn't any additional lots available. So I do feel that as we make it further through the master planning process, we will find a spot where it will become more feasible, and we'll have a plan of when there would be some lots available, and we'd adjust the forecast slightly at that point or whatever. So.
Yeah, just when you were talking about the number of aircraft based here, when I saw the number, I'm going, I think that's a little low. I really
I
do.
mean, it definitely is. I'm sure there's some planes in
Yeah.
there that aren't registered. Well, I know there is.
Yeah, but it's,
Generally it is, and that's why we really like a local count too.
it's
We
just taking a mental count, what each hanger, does, you know?
Yep, and we don't have a current a local count available to us. So it's something that, you know, if, you know, the Airport Commission could push to get a local count.
Yeah, I wonder if we shouldn't just ask the hangar owners.
Yep.
Just tell us how many airplanes you got in your hangar.
Yep, we're not trying to get anybody, you know,
No,
anybody in trouble or anything. We just, it helps you guys to have that more accurate count. Well, hey, this guy's got three stuffed away in here and 2 of them aren't registered right now with MnDOT. That just ups our numbers here, you know. And these numbers are going to be on the next slide too, are what drives the operations forecast.
Yeah, right, so.
Yep.
Maybe we could do something like that where we just simply email everybody and say, well, how many airplanes you got in your hangar
Yep.
on any given day or something like that, you know?
Does that come from Dan, from the
Yeah.
city, comes, email out to all the hangar lessees?
Would that be something you could do, Dan? I mean, as far as just asking them how many airplanes they got in their hangars, you know, they got, what, 27 or 28 emails?
I believe I have emails here, but I mean, I can reach out and just send an email out to say, respond back.
Yeah, just, we're just trying to get a, you know,
I'd prefer the responses to go directly to Bolton and Mink, just so they're getting the accurate
yeah,
information.
it's just numbers for the, it's.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's do that and see if we can make something like that happen.
Yeah, that'd be great if we would definitely update these numbers, you know. All we have right now is to use the MnDOT registration. They're happy to give us their registration numbers, and their registration numbers are 37 right now, which is still a lot of aircraft, so don't think that's too low of a number, so. So then, moving from the base aircraft, that's kind of, we use the base aircraft also in our activity forecast here. So once again, as I referred to the SASP, the State Aviation System Plan, they also look at annual operations. So they calculate out annual operations for kind of the same periods that they listed their based aircraft from. So what we do is we look at the annual operations for the similar size airports around and look at the annual operations for Forest Lake. Then we kind of take, the annual operations from a baseline year and divide that by what we have for based aircraft. And for Forest Lake, was about 271, I think is what we used here off of the baseline. So we take that and use that 271 as our baseline operations per based aircraft. And essentially, the operations agree pretty well with what we saw in the survey results. If you look, like the base year that we used from the SASP data up there on the top table was 9,000. Kind of varies between 9 and 10 going out to the 20-year planning period, or the 16 to 20 range. The results we saw in the user survey indicated about 9,000 annual operations. But we also, you also need to think of the fact that not every airport user submitted a user survey. So we expect that number to be lower than what we would see. So our numbers are very much in agreement with the results we saw back from the user survey here. So if we take kind of our baseline and just divide that by our based aircraft, that gets us our operations per based aircraft, which is what we use for our activity forecast next to get our annual operations. And so the based aircraft and the annual operations are kind of, in addition to one other factor here that we're going to talk about in a second, critical design aircraft, are the 3 components that really drive our facility requirements and what we think you guys are going to need for the 20-year planning period here. So if we look at this, this graph shows in 2019 we're at right about 10,000 operations per year based on the number of based aircraft we have and the operations data from the SASP that was calculated back in 2012. And if we see just increasing this up to through the 20-year planning period out to 2039, we see the operations increasing to about 16,000 operations per year, which is a pretty good increase over the 20-year period here. And another thing that kind of that'll spike this up and drive this is kind of runway length as that may increase, and or the additional approaches and stuff like that would probably be a larger spike that we would accommodate for in the activity forecast. So we just kind of talked about the based aircraft real quick, as well as the activity forecast. So these are two of the drivers that kind of determine the facility requirements, or what we see will be needed at the airport in the 20-year planning period coming up. The third component here is the critical design aircraft. So the critical design aircraft is essentially it's the largest and fastest aircraft category with 500 annual operations at the airport. This is defined by the FAA advisory circulars. So if you look at the tables here are directly from FAA advisory circulars as well. And they kind of show the different categories. So the first table there is the approach category. So that's looking at the approach speeds. And the second category is the aircraft design group, and that's more based on the wingspan and the tail height. So currently, based off the user surveys and what we see for based aircraft, trying to hit that 500 mark, the aircraft we see is an A1 aircraft, which is going to be less than 91 knots approach speed, and Group 1, which is a less than 49-foot wingspan. However, although it's an A1 aircraft, the airport is currently designed and is listed on their ALP, is currently designed for B2 standards. So that's a real common thing here. Essentially, the shift from an A1 to a B1, an A1 to a B2, which is what you guys are currently designed at, causes some restrictions in taxiway separations, safety area dimensions, stuff like that. So it's a real common thing that you'll protect for future growth expected. So essentially, you guys are protecting and designing for currently B2 aircraft. However, your actual critical design aircraft is going to be an A1 currently. We did see definitely some operations from B1 aircraft, which is good. We also expect that with the increase in if there's an increase in runway length, we know there's an FBO hangar being constructed right now that operates some B1 aircraft. So with some of that stuff and having the availability of some transient storage, the potential development for approaches, that's where you'd likely see some larger B2 aircraft coming in, which is why you'd kind of want to protect for that B2 aircraft, which is what you guys are currently doing. So we would recommend protecting for B2 in the future, although technically the data that we have right now shows an A1 as the actual critical design aircraft, if that makes sense. And that is kind of an FAA recommendation too. If I didn't say that it's they advise you to look ahead and not landlock yourself in and design for A1, build for A1, protect for A1, and then all of a sudden stuff has to get moved. It's actually more feasible for them to not have to reconstruct a whole taxiway when you do bump up to B2 than it is to build a little bit bigger right now. So. And here's just a couple examples too of some different aircraft. You saw kind of the data on the tables here. When you get into like some King Airs and stuff is when you start to get into the B-2 aircraft. It's going to be, slightly larger, twins, some corporate jets. And like I said, it's all dictated by the approach category, the approach speeds, and the wingspan on that. So just for your reference, here's a couple examples here. So we just kind of talked about the based aircraft, the aircraft forecast, the operations, and the critical design aircraft. So these are kind of the three main components that drive the facility requirements in addition to the demand at the airport. Does anybody have any questions about, I know we kind of talked about I probably went fast through some of the technical numbers there. Good, okay. So we'll go in and talk a little briefly about the facility requirements here. So like I said, the items we just talked about are kind of the drivers of the facility requirements. There is a demand for hangars, both public and private. We've seen that in the user survey. There's multiple users that indicated that they would base their aircraft here if there was adequate facilities, both T-hangar space as well as private lots to build. So that's something to think of. Would that be bay or T-hangars? What would the sizes be? Stuff like that is stuff to think about for the future here. The runway 1331 extension. You guys have on your existing ALP, I believe, shown to a 3,300 foot runway. That 3,300 feet may bring in some of the B-2 aircraft that you guys are protecting for here too, currently. Another thing to think of here is we're going to kind of jump up to the approaches a little bit. You guys, anything longer isn't really going to be cost feasible with having to relocate one of the roads. So that's kind of, landlocking at this point. However, you guys are currently, I believe, zoned for 3,300 feet. And that's what the planning is off the previous ALP, your guys' existing airport layout plan. So one of the, in talking about the runway length as well as the approaches, one thing to consider too is the minimum length from the FAA advisory circulars for a GPS approach that they kind of support is a 3,200 foot length. So that's something to keep in mind, as far as thinking about like just going to 3,000 or something. It might be more beneficial to jump right to the 32 because of the large demand that you guys see for instrument approaches, as well as, bringing in larger aircraft and stuff. So some things to think about for the facility requirements here.
Excuse me, you're saying they would not grant a GPS approach unless you have 3,200 feet?
Be less likely.
It's less like, I don't want to say it's not possible, but it's the recommended length for a GPS approach is going to be that 3,200 feet. Yep. Thank you for asking that. So 3,200 is a good number to look at as far as, the demand you guys have for approaches. And already having, the zoning in place for 3,300. I want to caution you guys from that 3,000 number and selling yourself short, you know what I mean, on some of those items. So one other thing to discuss too on the facility requirements, I think Silas talked about it, Mr. Undum talked about it briefly too, is kind of your fuel situation currently. There was some users that indicated the desire for Jet A or MoGas at the airport. I don't know if you guys see a lot of egg spraying units that come in for Jet A or something. Or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know exactly where the users come from. I just see that there was a slight demand for additional fuel. The existing facilities were adequate, but there was people that asked for additional fuel at the airport. So that's something to think about that we'll also look at here for the facility requirements coming up. So I guess that's the next step that Silas had mentioned too, is us getting the facility requirements coming up. So the next steps are essentially review the draft inventory and forecast chapter, which is what we're working on right now. We had just kind of talked about some of the forecast numbers. We had done the inventory previously when we were out here. Submit the forecast to MnDOT for review and approval. Analyze the facility requirements, and develop alternatives. So developing alternatives are kind of the next thing too, and that's going to be a big one for you guys. So essentially what we'll do is we'll talk with you guys to develop, to see, you know, which direction you guys would like to expand, you know. Do you guys want to see building, you know, what types of hangars would you like to see? What types of runway lengths would you like to see? Things like that. And what we'll essentially do is put together a few graphical representations of the best options that we can come up with to show you guys some of the options that we can see, whether that's adding, you know, a couple T-hangers and a bunch of lots, you know, what the lot sizes might be, a couple runway extension alternatives to show you what it would look like to have 3,000, you know, or 3,200 feet out there. So we'll kind of develop some alternatives after you guys digest some of this information, and we'll come back to you and present the alternatives actually. So it's not just, oh, you know, here we want some T-hangers and a bay hanger. Okay, here's T-hangers and a bay hanger, that's it. We'll give you some options to look at, and you can kind of see what will work best with you guys at the airport or whatever. So as Silas mentioned before, the second master plan update meeting will be in March sometime, and it will be flexible based on your guys' changing the schedule here. At that point, I would anticipate we'll show up with some alternatives to present to you guys based on the options we've kind of discussed here. So that's what we've got for you tonight. Let us know if you have any questions. Silas's contact info is here, as well as Mr. Undum, and thank you guys for the time tonight.
Yeah, thank you for your hard work.
Silas, I have one question for you on, somewhat related to the master plan, but going back to the CIP and the east hangars that we kind of talked about in the past, those kind of, was it 9 lots that we're planning out there? And
Correct.
my question is there anything, I mean, do we have to wait till this process is complete before any of the steps begin on those lots? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a survey, you know, a land survey that has to be done and lots staked out before infrastructure. I'm just curious what the first steps for those are, and if any of those steps could be started prior to this process and plan being completed.
So the conversation that was had with MnDOT was that the current ALP shows kind of a T-hanger off, let's say, the southeast side that would be facing, you know, some would be facing west, some would be facing east. If the layout that was presented showing the 9 lots, that was going to require an ALP sheet update either way before MnDOT to get on board. So it wouldn't be as simple as just saying, yeah, we can construct all 9. You could construct, you know, the 4, but then those 4 would be facing, you know, north and west, essentially the opposite direction of the rest of the hangars.
So we can't do anything on there without a new ALP being.
So let me pull up the aerial and show you the ones. You could do some of them.
But what you're saying is they really wouldn't fit the
There's
layout we
Correct.
are thinking of with the 9 hangars in there. It would have to conform to the previous ALP.
That is correct.
Now,
And-
is that only for MnDOT funding? Or, I mean, if MnDOT knows that we're going down this avenue of doing a completely new ALP and that we've kind of, you know, changed our focus on those from being a T hangar and that to being, you know, individual hangars, would that matter? I mean, I'm sure it would matter for MnDOT funding. They wouldn't fund us. But if we're talking, let's say it was just a survey. We'd need to get guys out there doing a survey, a lot survey. and I don't know what that costs, a couple grand, you know? And the city, if the city's willing to pay the couple grand to get the survey. I'm just thinking, can we work on parallel paths to get these hangars moving when we have so many people who would love to have hangar space? And I hate to see, I know this ALP process has to happen, and it's a big, long, extended process. I'm just wondering if we can work on parallel paths to maybe get those 9 hangars built or laid out so they can be leased out and things can move forward on them perhaps more quickly.
Yeah, if you're talking about local funding only, the city can do whatever they desired out there. When you start looking at state grants, then you got to kind of play by their rules. So, you know, it unfortunately didn't get green listed this last go around, and the comments that myself and Mr. Undum got was what threw it over the top cost-wise was the utilities. When they were looking at extending water main and sanitary to each one of those taxi lanes, it darn near, you know, doubles the cost, whereas just constructing the 25-foot taxi lane. MnDOT is aware, you know, of the demand of hangars out here. That's been explained to them, and they're on board with, you know, doing whatever they can within their funding parameters to help expand taxi lanes out here. And that was one of the reasons they did recommend, you know, looking at a full-blown plan. But like I mentioned, you know, we're going to put that project back on the CIP to try to get 2021 funding, which means come July 1 of 2020, you could conceivably start looking at that project. The big thing is what it comes down to is the utilities. I mean, that's where I know last year the commission didn't want to take the approach of just construct the hard surface taxi lane pavement without the utilities. They want sewer and water to be available to each one of the prospective, you know, tenants there. So that's something where I'm not sure if wanted to be reevaluated, because that was where MnDOT said that $480,000 cost just kind of was too much for them to do. If it could be split up over a couple years, they could facilitate it that way. But considering the nature of utility work and then constructing hangar lots, it'd be ideal to do it all together, but not to saying it couldn't be split up. That was kind of some of the comments that we had gotten from MnDOT.
I mean, I understand the ALP, we go till July of next year, and that, doing it that way, we can't even do anything. Our hands are tied until July of next year, which means realistically, we're talking 2022. I'm just wondering if we can get the, you know, I'd like maybe a sort of a checklist of things that have to occur, a lot survey, you know, does any remedial work have to be done to the ground? I don't know what all the steps are, you know?
Sure.
But if there's some of those steps that we can be working on now, and maybe they're not huge expenses, you know, less than $10,000 or so, we can get funding for the city, or we might be able to get funding for the city. I guess I'd like to know what those steps are. Like if you were to say, yeah, Don, if you guys had 15 grand, you could do this, this, and this, and start the ball rolling and start process moving on it. I guess that's what I'm looking for.
Well, I think the main thing you have to consider is the fact that you can't do it and expect to be reimbursed. It has, you know what I mean?
Understand.
Okay, as long as that understanding is there, I mean, then if you can figure out the funding, fine.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to figure out the funding then, but and I'm not saying that the city's gonna cough up $400,000 for putting in all the plumbing, that infrastructure part. But if we're talking, like I say, a few $1,000s to get the survey done, or whatever, if there are small steps along the way that we're not talking huge dollars.
Sure.
I don't think it's impossible. I think it's worth bringing to the city council and suggesting. So that's why I would just like to see kind of, with respect to those 9 future hangar spots, what are the steps and what would the individual, you know, line item costs for those? And
right.
Maybe we can get funding approved for the city to get the ball rolling on those.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't see any work that could be done now that's going to accelerate the process. The planning work that is done, so you have a layout in place, you have lot sizes that are identified based on the lot sizes that are previously there, you have cost estimate put together. I wouldn't recommend, you know, hiring Bolton & Mank to go and do a survey or anything like that at this nature, because you don't know if the funding is in place. The preliminary work that is done is what you really need to know, okay, these are the lot sizes, this is how you would lay it out. this is where you would construct the taxi lane. I mean, and that all is in place, ready to go. I know, it'd be great to be able to break ground tomorrow, but unfortunately, without the funding secured, I wouldn't personally recommend, getting ahead and completing any of the design, because you have preliminary layouts that are good enough to get you going. And if the MnDOT says in March or April, yeah, funding is available, I wouldn't concern myself with a sheet update. That could be done relatively quickly to show the additional taxi lane rather than the T-hanger, and then that could all be incorporated into the final ALP. So if the funding is in place, then yeah, full speed ahead. But I don't think it makes any sense to jump to.
That big ticket item of the infrastructure is really have to wait for that for a minute.
Correct, and that's something that it's worth having the discussion. I know we've talked about it here at some meetings previously this year, once the green list came out, is, at that time, the commission was still, yep, we want to include the utility extensions as part of that. If you're looking for a way to get state funding, I know they're saying, that's a big ask to include the utility cost. If there was a way to split it over a couple years, something along those lines.
Okay.
Is there any reconsideration or stomach of my fellow airport commissioners to just extend gas and electric out only without sewer and water?
Maybe that's an item that is brought up in the airport workshop or we talk about. But I know that met a lot of opposition before. I mean.
Well, there was some pushback from the building officials on that too, but I don't think that was the case. I think
could
they
be
were,
overcome.
I think so too. So
Because
what-
when we start developing the north end down there, we're probably not gonna have the same infrastructure.
Same problem, yeah, same problem, no question about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's exactly something that was going to come up probably the next meeting is you can lay out hangars and you can lay out taxi lanes, but when you start looking at utilities, particularly sewer and water, gas, I'm sure it's somewhere available kind of off 97 there, but sewer and water extensions could be something that might make it, cost prohibitive to expand kind of where Hangar Echo is right now. So it's things like that. I mean, obviously, if you go T-hangars, those are cold storage. You're just looking at running electric out there. But if you're looking at the private hangars and you start looking at sewer, water, and gas, you're just looking at costs going up. So things like that are something to kind of take into consideration as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks, Alice.
Next on our agenda is, I guess, a discussion of the airport workshop meeting. Sam?
Sure, I think Dan can help us out there a little bit too. I know there's been some discussion with the city council. In fact, as I had conversation with the mayor and the city administrator about scheduling a workshop meeting for sometime in January, and I would assume, Dan, that would probably be like the third Monday.
The date has not been set yet. We've been kind of, on the city side, busy getting year-end stuff down here. We'll look at getting that meeting scheduled, but to date, we have not have a definitive date yet, but as soon as we get it scheduled, we'll let
Yeah, the
everybody know.
idea is to get it done in January though, so for sure. And there's gonna be several things that, in fact, as I told him that we needed a couple hours to talk about things that need to be done at the airport. And, or at least at some loose ends and, anywhere from the $280 thing to a couple hangars out there that are working and that aren't, it's not aircraft stuff, and what's going to happen with our funding and all kinds of different things. For one thing, we get farmland funding from the 123 acres that's south of us there. Well, we've been trying to sell that piece of property. And if that happens, then our funding's going to take a hit, so we got to figure out how we're going to budget that into the airport. And then also, one of the things I wanted to bring up, and it's going to be brought up, is the fact that one of the things that happens when they plow snow or particularly plowing snow, is that that gets charged against our funding at the airport. And one of the things I brought up is that might be okay for the runway, but the taxiway area there, we pay taxes like everybody else. So maybe there's something we can do about adjusting that number too. So there's, I'm gonna have a list of about 5 or 6 things that they need to be talked about, so.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask. Would you possibly have that list for the January meeting?
I can do that.
It'd be
for
great if you had that,
I'll do
just so
that.
we can
Yep.
run through it and
I'm-
everybody
I'm
can
gonna
know
get
what we're gonna
together-
talk about.
I'll get together with Dan and we'll have that taken care of for you, so. That's all I know about it so far on
Okay.
that, so.
Loose ends, April through September meetings, 6:30 or 7 PM. October through March meetings at 6 PM.
We talked about it, we didn't decide
Do we
anything.
want to make a decision on this, Dan? Do you want to, I don't know what's on your,
Usually we don't run into somebody else's meetings, so.
No, I mean, Wednesday
Pretty easy.
night, the meeting night is not, it's whatever you guys, it's at your discretion.
Yeah, the first Wednesday's pretty open, you know what I mean, so it's pretty easy for us to change those times. And I'm the one that brought it up because what happened during the summer is we were busy and it was
Yep,
just kind of
yep.
hard to make it.
Other commissions do, the Parks, Lakes and Trails Commission does summer meeting hours versus winter meeting hours to accommodate other schedules, so
Yeah,
it's really your discretion when you guys want to meet.
I guess I'd like to see the 6:30 during the summer at least.
you want to see 6:30 or you want to see 7?
Well, I can get by a lot easier with 6:30. I'm trying to make it a compromise here, so.
It doesn't matter to me either
Okay.
way.
I move to move our summer meetings from April through September to 6:30 PM.
Sam, you second
I'll
that?
second it, yep.
Any comments, Mr. Dahlbeck?
No comments.
What about the frequency of meetings? Do we want to talk about
Well,
that?
Well,
that's the other-
let's
that's
get
the
the
big-
times.
Later?
uh,
Okay, we'll talk about that.
I'm in agreement with 6:30, so all in favor of 6:30 meeting times, April through September?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that's what we will change to.
Yeah, the other thing that I know John was gonna bring up, you can talk about it, is there may not be a necessity to have a meeting every month.
There we go.
Right.
So, and I guess, Dan, you might be able to elaborate on that, unless there's something going on with the engineers and that kind of thing.
Correct. I mean, I think, from a meeting standpoint, having an every other month meeting, given the amount of volume of work that the commission kind of sees before it, seems to make better alignment, so every meeting is more productive. An every other month meeting schedule also, I mean, it doesn't eliminate the fact that if we need to have a monthly meeting, we can always add meetings to the calendar. I just think it just sets the year up where, having more productive meetings, but if for some reason for a planning aspect, they need to have another meeting, we can always add an additional meeting, at any time we need to.
Could we do that on a month-to-month basis? I mean, if we have a meeting, we can decide whether or not we need a meeting next month? Or would it?
We can, I mean, the one thing that's nice about having that schedule set is that we do a yearly calendar for all the meeting schedules, so that people just know, and when we start to cancel them, that's when it starts to, you lose some of that consistency when your meetings are, so it's always easier to have a set schedule and add meetings versus have a set schedule and always subtract them out.
But we could set our schedule now for, January, March, May, July.
Correct.
And if we needed to add on those even months, we could do that. I'd be in favor of that if anybody, unless anybody else sees a reason to do otherwise.
Do I hear a motion?
Yeah,
I will make a motion to, that the Forest Lake Airport Commission meets every other month, starting January of 2020, per schedule every other month, with the option of adding the even months as necessary.
and I'll second it.
We have a second. Any further discussion?
Just want to make sure I get it right. Change the airport commission meetings per scheduled to every other month, odd numbered
Yes.
months,
Beginning with January.
beginning with January 2020. Good.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, there we go.
Just a point of clarification for my part, so the remaining meetings outside of the summertime schedule, those are still at 6 o'clock, or do you want?
Yes.
Yeah, they'll still be.
Those
Got
are
it.
unchanged.
Yeah.
Just wanted to confirm that I get the
And
schedule
I'll
right.
put that in the minutes too, and I'll
Perfect.
put the schedule for the year in there.
I'll make sure we get it in the
Yep.
updated city calendar.
Lifelink helicopter landing area. Rich Islandfeld was nice enough to bring this up, and I've been researching this, and I've been making phone calls on this. It is not set in stone yet, but the problem is communication between the helicopter and the various ambulance services that we have around here. I've discovered we have more than one ambulance service around here. So I've been making phone calls on this. I've been trying to get it to the point where we don't need a helicopter landing area for the various reasons that were presented tonight, and instead, we make sure that ambulances go down the taxiway and to the fuel area. And I think I've made progress on that. I'll report final progress next month. I've given them diagrams, I've shown them where to turn. We're making progress on this.
That's that's the whole thing I tried to bring up.
Yeah.
Is it's really up to them to make that.
Right,
Up to
Right.
them to make the training and the whole thing.
I was even gonna object to the sign. I won't object to the sign, but I was gonna object to having a, ambulance this way sign. Instead, just teach them where to turn and it'll be okay.
Yep.
The problem was that they drove to the parking lot area and then they had to go up the hill and la-di-da-di-da. So progress is being made there, and I have documentation of every phone call I've made, the person I talked to, and the date that I talked to them. Phone number for change for ForeFlight, I've worked on that, but I haven't accomplished that yet either. But I'm still working on that too, and I'm gonna continue to put this, with your permission of the chair, on the agenda until it gets taken care of, because it's a legitimate concern. And it was brought up again by Rich Eilenfeld.
It is on here, the Washington County funding. I did speak with the mayor briefly about this, and her only thoughts on that right now is that the city in general is working on funding for some road issues, and working with the county and she didn't want to muddy the waters with other items at this time. So I can understand that. So we'll see what, but she completely understands that we do pay taxes. Every one of those hangars out there pays county taxes. And there is certainly a reason to believe we can get some funding.
I'm sorry, who did you talk to about this?
The mayor,
The mayor of
Forest Lake.
Forest Lake, okay, yeah,
Mara Bain.
yep.
I had a couple items I was asked to add, one being snow plowing. Does someone want to talk in general about?
Well, as a matter of fact, I made a phone call to Dan this morning. I was at a class all day, so one of the breaks I was able to call Dan because when I was out there, the runway had been plowed, but it was just covered in ice. And today I was hoping that maybe they could run over it one more time, try to get rid of some of that. And then we need to get a NOTAM if we can't get it all off of there. And then the other thing I brought up was when I looked out there yesterday, the plow guy, when he went around the corner, he left a couple of big lumps right in the middle of the runway there. So that's unacceptable. And we got to take care of that. And otherwise somebody's going to have a real issue there. So.
The other thing on that plowing, I mean, they plowed right clear down past the taxiway and out into the field. I mean, is that intentional? Somebody has to do that?
That wasn't the city that did that. And so somebody took it upon themselves to do that, so.
I'm not opposed to that. I mean, prior to someone doing that, there was a big plow lump of snow relatively close to the taxiway that I've got a low wing plane. I don't know if it would have gotten over it. So I was kind of glad to see that. I don't know if you were concerned about that or.
Well, I was just wondering what the change was all about, you know?
No, there was nothing on the city's part is all I can tell you.
The AD building, maintenance and cleaning.
Okay, that's one of the things that that's gonna be all part of our workshop meeting, so we can establish exactly what's gonna happen there.
Okay.
And so.
Okay, that'll be on that.
That's on the agenda there, so.
There's also brought up, some commission members' terms expire in this year, right? This would be the last meeting, and I don't know whose that is. It could be my own. I don't even know.
That is a good question. I can look that up while we have the conversation.
And I know we all serve at the behest of the mayor, so it's really up to her, but I'm sure she would like to know if those that are up for their term are interested in continuing.
At this point, all of the commission appointments are current through 2021.
All of them?
Correct.
Okay,
Based on the document I have in front of me, so it's,
okay.
Chair Stellers and Dahlbecks go through January 30th of 2021. Monson's and Schmidt's go through January 30th of 2022.
Okay.
That's what I have. And the council liaison can be reappointed every year if that's, it does at the, at the annual committee assignments if they want to change.
Yeah, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a different thing. That's not a, that's a different.
And
entity.
in the past, I've asked the council to change it so that the liaison was not a voting member. That has never happened one way or the other, so we'll, I don't know if we need to work on that or not, or if it's even necessary.
Okay. We will go to others from the floor. Does anyone out there have anything? Please speak now. No. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
Okay, we have a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you. 7:10.